Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am B.A.N.K, otherwise known as Black Auntie No Kids, and I am rich in perspective but broke for the foolishness. It took me a minute, but I finally completed this deep dive into the psyche of Liv's struggle with her own identity. When I made this podcast, the feds hadn't came a knocking. So this is a little bit behind that, but it's still relevant. And what we're witnessing right now is the endless crash out. But again, I think this video ties in very well to what we are seeing. I think that this is a fair assessment of, again, what's really going on inside this broken soul. A lot of the stuff covered, many of us have already figured out because we are real Black women and not just cosplaying one based on internalized racism from our ancestors. Now, full disclosure, just as I did on my previous deep dive into Liv's motherhood, I used well-researched studies and sources mixed with my own personal observations of biracials who have a similar background of Liv's. And so even though this podcast is generated by Notebook LM, it has my input in it. Again, it wouldn't exist as a unique piece of work if I did not give it what it needed to make this podcast happen. So I hope everyone listening will enjoy the results. Let's get started.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're inviting you to join us as we audit the psychological architecture of a content creator named Olivia Johnson.
Who most of you probably know online as Love Live.
Right. And to do this properly, we've pulled together a really dense, highly specific stack of source material for you.
We're looking directly at Olivia's own YouTube vlogs, specifically broadcast titled Girl BYE, and I'm Being Exposed. But we're not just taking her word for it. We are pairing her internal narrative with hard, objective data.
Which is crucial here.
Exactly. So we have critical timeline analyses from the B.A.N.K channel, alongside some deeply insightful social commentary from Reese Ireland.
And to ground all of this in actual sociology and clinical psychology, we're looking at peer-reviewed research on biracial identity, specifically focusing on white motherhood. We're pulling from the Verbian paper, the SFPS mom blog, and a Walden University dissertation.
Yeah, we're even going all the way back to the 19th century, utilizing historical texts from the Jim Crow Museum regarding the tragic mulatto trope.
It's a massive amount of information. Okay, so let's unpack this from the ground up. Because to understand how a massive psychological defense mechanism operates in a grown adult broadcasting to thousands of people, you can't just look at what they're doing today, right?
No, you have to examine the original environment that forged them.
Exactly. And the sources point to a very specific, highly complex upbringing for Olivia. The experience of a biracial child raised in a white vacuum.
And when we say white vacuum, we are talking about an environment that completely lacks intersectionality or any organic ties to Black culture.
Which is so alienating.
It really is. And for those who might not use that term daily, intersectionality is simply the idea that different parts of a person's identity, like their race, their gender, their economic background, they overlap and interact to shape their experience in the world.
Right, they aren't just isolated traits.
Exactly. In a healthy environment, a biracial child's overlapping identities are recognized, they're nurtured, but in a vacuum, those realities are ignored, or worse, they're actively crushed.
And the sources paint a vivid, frankly painful picture of what that crushing actually looks like on a daily basis. I mean, if we pull from the Brood America video transcripts and Reese Ireland's commentary, we hear these firsthand accounts of the profound anti-Blackness that exists inside some of these specific family dynamics.
Yeah, it's intense.
We're not talking about subtle, unintentional microaggressions here. We're talking about overt hostility from the very people providing a child's food and shelter.
The Brood America's source details some harrowing examples that illustrate this perfectly. One biracial individual recounted living with their white mother and grandmother and simply coming downstairs wearing a shirt featuring Malcolm X holding a rifle.
And what happened?
The grandmother immediately expressed disgust, calling him so violent and just completely dismissing the historical context of Black self-defense.
Wow.
Yeah. Another individual detailed reading a Facebook post from their white uncle, who explicitly stated he would, quote, kill any Black Lives Matter or Antifa protester if defund the police were achieved.
That is, I mean, that's a death threat.
It is. The individual noted the terrifying realization that because they actively organized those protests, their own uncle was broadcasting a direct threat to their life. Another person recounted discovering their white family had a casual nickname for their black father that heavily involved the N-word.
Which is just staggering to think about as a child's foundational reality. And the thing is, Olivia has admitted to a very similar background.
She has, yeah.
She was raised in a white family with zero organic ties to the black community. She's openly admitted to growing up in an environment where her identity was basically treated as a fault line, where she was devalued through racial slurs by the very people raising her.
Right. And to understand the psychological rupture this causes, we turn to the sociological data. The Verbian paper and the Walden University dissertation, they both dive into the intense pressure of navigating a white mother's racialized identity.
Because the mothers often don't know how to handle it either.
Exactly. Often, to avoid the discomfort of race, these families employ a strategy of colorblindness. The SFPS Mom blog talks about this too. It's this post-racial optimism of the 1970s and 80s. The idea that we are all just human.
Which sounds nice in theory, but
the research shows that colorblindness in a racially stratified society doesn't actually protect the child at all. It functions as identity erasure.
because it tells the child that the part of them that is different is essentially taboo. Like if we can't talk about it, it must be bad. But I have to push back here a little bit because I want to make sure we're holding two truths at once for you guys listening.
Okay, go for it.
I hear you on the trauma, but I'm struggling with the agency piece. Like, millions of people have terrible, toxic childhoods, and they don't grow up to abandon their responsibilities or terrorize people on the internet. At what point does the trauma excuse end and her own personal choices begin?
Well, it's a crucial question, but the analysis isn't meant to remove her agency. It's meant to explain her automated responses.
Can we explain that a bit more?
So trauma isn't just the bad thing that happened to you, right? Trauma is the physiological and psychological adaptation that happens inside you as a result. If you are a 7-year-old child and the people providing your fundamental safety are actively hostile toward half of your genetic makeup, your brain faces an impossible dilemma.
Because you can't escape them.
Exactly. You cannot hold your caretakers accountable. You can't say, my family is racist and toxic, I'm leaving.
Right. You have literally nowhere to go. You depend on them for survival.
Yes. So clinically, this leads to a phenomenon known as trauma bonding with the oppressor. The sheer terror of realizing your protectors actually reject a core part of you is too much for a child's ego to bear. So the brain performs this desperate psychological split.
To survive.
To survive, yes. The child must normalize the hostility. They internalize the rejection, concluding, my family isn't wrong, I am inherently flawed. They completely bury the blame that belongs to the caretakers because confronting it would mean facing total isolation. So Olivia's agency today is heavily compromised by the fact that she never processed that betrayal. Her brain is permanently stuck in that childhood survival loop.
Okay, so to use an analogy, it's like a computer operating system that has a massive corrupted file buried deep in its core code.
That's a great way to look at it.
You can update the user interface, you can change the desktop background, you can set up a ring light and stream to the internet. But every time this system tries to process a complex task, like personal accountability or authentic connection, it hits that corrupted file and completely crashes. You aren't fixing the code, you're just endlessly restarting the machine.
And that corrupted file generates a massive amount of psychological friction. Anger like that doesn't just evaporate. Energy demands expression.
It has to go somewhere.
Exactly. If she cannot and will not direct her anger at the white family member who actually caused the original wound, her psyche demands a proxy. It requires a new, safer target to absorb all of that unresolved trauma and rage.
Which brings us right into her digital footprint. Because when you look at who Olivia chooses to fight online, her manufactured enemies are incredibly specific. If you watch her vlogs, particularly the Girl B.A.N.K broadcast, there is a constant, unyielding narrative that Black women are her ultimate haters.
Yeah, she is perpetually embroiled in conflict with them, and the specificity of the target is highly revealing. She isn't fighting random trolls, she is fighting a very particular demographic.
Right. She literally looks into the camera and talks about people being shady to her, claiming she is this innocent victim of relentless internet hate. She says she will never accept the narrative that she brings the negativity on herself.
It's always externalized.
Always. She frames all of her aggressive, toxic behavior as simply defending herself against these phantom detractors.
And this is where Rhys Ireland's sociological commentary on the white mom biracial experience becomes essential. Rhys breaks down a deeply uncomfortable reality. Biracial women who are raised by white mothers who harbor anti-blackness often internalize that exact same resentment.
It bleeds into them.
Yes. Rhys notes that these children learn to view their own blackness as an inconvenience, a source of frustration, or something inherently less desirable simply because that was the subtle and sometimes overt messaging at home.
Rhys actually said something in the source material that made me pause the recording. It was so heavy.
What was it?
She said she eventually realized that the black girls in her youth weren't rejecting her because she was mixed or light-skinned. They were rejecting her because she was, in her words, insufferable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She said she had learned to be insufferable from her white mother. She had absorbed an anti-black rhetoric that made her view the black community as monolithic, loud, or embarrassing. So she had fractured her own identity before she even tried to connect with them.
And Rhys's profound self-awareness there highlights exactly what Olivia lacks. What the data suggests is that Olivia is engaging in classic trauma displacement.
Okay, break that down for us clinically.
So from a mechanistic standpoint, here is how that operates. The amygdala, the fear center of the brain, treats the emotional threat of her family's original rejection as an unresolved crisis. By projecting her internal self-hatred, the anti-blackness she was raised with, onto black women online, she creates a psychological shield.
Wait, I'm trying to visualize this in real time. If she attacks someone in her live chat or rants about a black female creator, is she essentially substituting that random person for her family members? Is that how the proxy war functions?
Yes, exactly. Her internal monologue is heavily guarded by this displacement. By making them the aggressors, she gets to tell herself, I'm not fitting in because they are jealous of me or because they hate me. It has nothing to do with the fact that I am culturally hollow and don't know who I am.
It's an ego defense.
Completely. It is infinitely easier for the human ego to fight a manufactured online enemy than to admit the devastating truth. The people who were supposed to protect her in childhood fundamentally failed her, and as a result, she doesn't know how to exist in the culture she claims.
So she is desperately trying to defeat the ghost of her white family's rejection through a webcam. If black women are the enemy, then Olivia gets to be the victim. And if she is the victim, she never has to take accountability for her own toxic behavior. She just outsources her internal conflict onto the internet.
Outsourcing is the perfect word for it, but, that creates a secondary problem.
Yes.
If she casts black women as the enemy to avoid confronting her family's racism, how does she attempt to claim the cultural belonging that she so clearly craves? Because she was denied it growing up, but her online persona heavily relies on proximity to black culture. How does she bridge that gap without doing the hard, vulnerable work of actual integration?
Oh, she doesn't. She seeks a transactional shortcut. And this part of the research completely blew my mind because it ties her modern live streaming behavior to some incredibly dark historical realities. We're talking about transactional shields and male preference.
Yeah, this is a heavy pivot. When we analyze Olivia's streams, there is a constant, deliberate use of hypersexuality. She publicly and repeatedly insists that she is the default preference for black men.
It's her main talking point.
Right. She centers her physical appeal, her light skin, and her specific aesthetic as her primary currency. To understand why this is a trauma response and not just modern internet culture, we have to look at the historical texts from the Jim Crow Museum regarding the tragic mulatto trope.
Right. This is a literary and cinematic stock character that emerged way back in the 19th century. You see it in Lydia Maria Child's stories from the 1840s, or in Fannie Hurst's novel and the subsequent film Imitation of Life.
Yes, the character of Keola.
Exactly. Keola, who is so tortured by her mixed heritage that she completely rejects her dark-skinned mother to pass for white, desperate for the approval of the dominant class.
The historical trope emphasized mixed-race women who were inherently marginalized, suffering deep internal division, and tragically, they were often marketed purely for their perceived beauty in what historians referred to as the fancy trade.
Which is just awful to think about.
It's horrific. Because they were barred from true social integration and lacked a solid foundation in either world, their physical proximity to whiteness was weaponized as a commodity. They sought validation through transactional intimacy because organic belonging was structurally denied to them.
When you lay that historical 19th century template over Olivia's modern-day 21st century webcam behavior, the parallels are chilling. She is reducing an entire rich, complex culture down to a superficial currency, sexual attention.
Yes.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are in 2026. Women are encouraged to be empowered, to own their sexuality, to monetize their appeal if they want to. How do we objectively differentiate between genuine empowered confidence and a rigid trauma response? Isn't it a bit regressive to pathologize her sexual confidence?
It would be if it were actually confidence. The clinical differentiation lies in the underlying function and the flexibility of the behavior.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning, genuine confidence is grounded. It exists whether or not there is an audience, and it allows for mutual reciprocal vulnerability. A person with genuine confidence can engage in a multifaceted relationship with a culture that can discuss art, history, shared struggles, and community. A trauma response, however, is compulsive, rigid, and strictly transactional.
So it's about predictability.
Exactly. By keeping her interactions with the culture purely based on sexual preference and physical aesthetic, Olivia keeps the dynamic entirely predictable. She knows the rules of that specific game.
So she's safe.
Yes. If she were to engage in a real reciprocal relationship with the culture, it would require her to look honestly at her own unhealed identity. It would require her to admit what she doesn't know, to be a student, to be vulnerable.
So by insisting she is simply the preference, she builds a fortress. She is essentially saying, I don't need to do the hard work of cultural integration, and I don't need to heal my internal fractures because my physical appearance grants me automatic, unquestioned entry.
That's exactly what she's saying.
It's like using counterfeit money. It might look like real cultural capital on the surface, and you can definitely spend it for a while in the shallow end of the internet, getting views, getting likes, whatever. But the moment you take it to the bank for something real, like building a stable family or cultivating a genuine community, it gets flagged as fake. It doesn't hold any real value.
And that leads to the inevitable crisis. Because when the counterfeit money is rejected, when that fragile defense system of transactional intimacy and proxy wars fails against the weight of the real world, the ego is thrown into an absolute state of panic.
It has to crash.
Right. You can only control the narrative on your webcam for so long before objective reality crashes in. And in Olivia's case, objective reality arrived in the form of family court documents.
Which means we need to talk about the hard, undeniable data. Let's look at the contrast between her curated online reality and her objective legal reality, pulling from the timeline analyzed by the B.A.N.K channel.
This is where the dissonance gets really loud.
It really does. Olivia has spent years online cultivating this image of an empowered, peaceful, highly elevated mother. But the family court mathematics tell a drastically different story. According to the objective timeline, Olivia suffered a massive legal demotion regarding her children. She lost 66% of her physical custody, dropping down to just 4 days a month.
And the context of that loss is critical. This occurred after she voluntarily abandoned the jurisdiction, fleeing to Florida for 5 months.
5 months.
5 months. But the climax of this objective reality is her incarceration. Olivia served a 43-day county jail sentence.
And we have to emphasize this wasn't a clerical error or a brief misunderstanding.
No, not at all. She was locked in a cell for civil contempt due to thousands of dollars in unpaid child support. A judge reviewed the facts and physically removed her freedom because she was non-compliant and abandoning her legal responsibilities. That is the empirical truth of her life.
But if you watch her I'm Being Exposed vlog, which she filmed around the time of these exact events, you would have absolutely no idea.
No.
She doesn't mention the judge. She doesn't mention the 43 days in jail. She looks at her audience and calmly explains that she is simply stepping back to protect her peace.
The psychological gymnastics required to maintain that level of cognitive dissonance are profound. I mean, in her videos, she claims she is facing severe demonic energy and spiritual attacks.
Spiritual attacks, right.
She frames the chaos of a court-ordered jail sentence not as a consequence of her own actions, but as proof that she is spiritually elevating. She literally refers to her birthday month during this period of legal collapse as June elevation.
So how does her brain actually pull this off? If I'm sitting in a jail cell, it's pretty hard to convince myself I'm just on a spiritual retreat.
Yeah.
What is the clinical mechanism here? Is this what the research refers to as defensive conflation?
Defensive conflation is a major part of it. This is a survival strategy where a person deliberately lumps objective, evidence-based critics, like people bringing actual court documents and pointing out a jail sentence, into the exact same category as low-level, toxic internet trolls.
So if I show up in your comments with a public court document showing you owe thousands in child support, you just label me a demonic troll alongside someone who insulted your hair, and suddenly you don't have to answer to the math.
Precisely. By conflating the two, it invalidates the objective truth in the minds of her audience. But internally, this requires a much deeper mechanism. We can think of it as the divine eraser.
The divine eraser, I like that.
Because Olivia completely lacks internal self-awareness, she simply cannot process the agonizing shame of her objective failures. Think of her psyche like a computer with very limited RAM.
Subtracting.
If she were to open the file labeled, "I abandoned my kids for 5 months and went to jail," the system would overload. The ego would experience a total hardware crash.
So instead of crashing, the system forcefully reboots.
Exactly. Her coping mechanism is the perpetual reset. She uses spirituality, moving to a new state, or announcing a new era to wipe the slate entirely clean. By claiming God is giving her a do-over, or that the demons are attacking her because she's destined for greatness, she builds an impenetrable theological shield.
She never has to look at the wreckage of her past because she is perpetually, frantically focused on this manufactured, pristine future.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for her daily life? It completely explains the frantic pace of her content. It is a digital hamster wheel. She has to keep streaming.
She has no choice.
She has to keep inventing new crises, new enemies, new elevations. Because the second the ring light turns off, the second the stream ends, she is forced to sit alone in the quiet dark with the objective reality she is running from. The silence would be deafening.
The silence is where accountability lives. And she has spent her entire life running from accountability. Because, again, if we trace it all the way back to her childhood in that white vacuum, accountability meant facing the terrifying fact that she was unprotected by the people who are supposed to love her.
It always comes back to the root.
Always. To look at her own failures today would be to finally feel the full weight of that original unhealed wound.
But a delusion of this magnitude, this constant perpetual reset and divine eraser, it can't survive in a vacuum, right? It takes an immense amount of energy to sustain a reality where a 43-day jail sentence is just stepping back for peace. And Olivia isn't doing this alone.
No, she's definitely not.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most disturbing piece of the puzzle, the ecosystem of enablers.
A delusion this heavy requires constant funding, external validation, and a willing audience to co-create the fantasy. Olivia does not operate in isolation. She is propped up by what the B.A.N.K analysis refers to as the loyalty gang.
These are the hardcore parasocial defenders. If you look at her streams, these people are showering her with super chats, literal hard currency, and endless emotional absolution.
It's wild to watch.
They're typing in all caps, calling her a queen, telling her she's a victim of a corrupt legal system, agreeing that the demons are just trying to pull her down. But the real question is why? Why do thousands of viewers voluntarily hand over their money to fund a creator who goes to jail for contempt and actively abandons her responsibilities? What are they getting out of it?
To understand the audience, we have to look at the sociology of parasocial relationships and a clinical concept called vicarious codependency.
Vicarious codependency. Okay, what does that mean in this context?
You have to look at the demographic that aggressively defends this specific type of behavior. The data suggests that the audience is heavily projecting their own fractured lives onto Olivia.
So they see themselves in her mess.
Deeply. Many of these enablers are likely fighting their own messy custody battles. They have their own toxic relationship histories. They may have their own deep-seated failures regarding providing stability or paying their own child support.
So watching her is triggering something for them.
Yes. When they watch Olivia on screen, their brains are highly engaged. There's a biological component to that involving mirror neurons.
Walk us through that. How do mirror neurons make someone want to give their money to someone avoiding accountability?
Well, mirror neurons are brain cells that react both when a particular action is performed and when it is only observed. When this audience watches Olivia successfully reframe her massive legal and moral failures as spiritual attacks, their brains chemically reward them with the same dopamine relief they would feel if their own real-world problems were suddenly dismissed.
Oh, wow. So the transaction isn't about entertainment.
No, it's about neurochemical absolution.
It's the psychological GoFundMe.
That is exactly the dynamic at play.
The audience isn't paying for Olivia's content. They are paying a monthly subscription fee to keep their own guilt at bay. Because if Olivia is a good mother and a queen, despite going to jail and losing 66% of her custody, then they're good people despite whatever wreckage they have left in their own lives.
Yes, fact.
If her failures are just demons, then their failures are just demons too. They're literally paying for an outsourced conscience.
And this perfectly explains why the loyalty gang polices her comment section with such vicious aggression. If an objective viewer comes in and mentions the court documents or mentions the 43 days in jail, the enablers attack them immediately.
Because it breaks the illusion.
Right. They aren't just defending a YouTuber. If Olivia's delusion falls apart, if she is forced to admit she is the architect of her own destruction, the audience's vicarious absolution falls apart right along with it. They are desperately protecting their own mirror.
Which makes this entire digital ecosystem incredibly tragic. When you pull it all together, when you look at the whole clinical audit we've just conducted, Olivia's online behavior is not simply a case of a standard internet villain trying to get clicks.
No, the data paints a much more sorrowful picture. It is a deeply complex, automated response to unhealed childhood trauma. She was raised in a racial vacuum, taught to devalue herself by the people she trusted most, and she never processed that original wound.
She has built this massive digital monetized kingdom to shield herself from an identity crisis she is absolutely terrified to confront.
Yeah.
She projects her pain onto Black women because she can't fight her family. She uses transactional hypersexuality to fake a cultural belonging she was denied. She relies on the divine eraser to forcefully reboot her psyche and wipe away the undeniable legal facts of her life.
And it is all funded, fueled, and validated by an audience that is desperately seeking the exact same escape.
It is the tragedy of unhealed trauma playing out in real time, monetized by a platform architecture that financially rewards chaos over healing.
Beautifully said.
Which leaves us with a final lingering question for you, the listener, to ponder on your own. We've just spent this time clinically auditing one single creator's psychological matrix. We've looked at the murky, complicated waters of her diagnostic landscape.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is.
Yeah.
But if the internet is now functioning as a mass enabler for individual trauma loops, if millions of people are out there trading super chats for vicarious absolution, how many other creators currently dominating your feeds are just running from their own history in plain sight?
That's the real question.
And more importantly, what does it say about us as a society that we keep paying to watch them run? Like we said at the top of the show, sometimes the X-ray machine is broken, and the murky waters are much deeper than we ever wanted to admit. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
So what do you think of the assessment? And can you see how all of this ties into her current behaviors? Let me know in the comments below. Also, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you already aren't. I appreciate everyone who has watched my videos from the Nesto content now to live. However, I will be changing it up a bit and I hope you continue to tune in. Until the next time I upload, have a great day. Bye now.